Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. In the previous video, we studied about double linked list. In this video, we are going to learn more about how to insert node. We are going to learn how to insert a node at three different places. Number one is at the beginning of a linked list. Number two, at any position. It can be either position 1, 2, 3, 4, and at the end. Okay. We are not going to cover the programming part in this video. A separate video will be uploaded for that. In this video, we are going to learn the explanation how to insert. Now, let's make a chain of nodes. Let's make node A, node B, and node C. As we know, in double linked list, each node have three boxes, right? The first one is the reference of the previous node. The second one is the reference of the next node, and it goes on, right? So let's fill it up. Let's take node A, node B, node C. Okay, now we are assuming the addresses of each node. For node A, let's say the address is 100. For node B, address is 101. For node C, the address is 102. And since A is pointing to node B, this box is going to contain the address of node B, which is 101. Here we don't have any node previous to A, therefore it is going to contain none or null. Now in node B, B is pointing to node C, so this box is going to contain the reference of node C, which is 102. Okay, now here the previous node to B is node A, and what is the address or reference of A? It is 100, so it is going to store 100. Okay, now node C, what is the previous node to node C? It is B, correct? And what is the address of B? 101. Now node C, since there are no nodes after C, it is going to store null. Okay, so now our chain of nodes is ready. Okay, now here we are going to insert a node at the beginning. Now what will be our first step? Our first step, whenever we are going to insert a node, our very first step will be always to create a node. Okay, firstly we will create a node, and when we create a node, a new node looks something like this. A new node will look like this. Let's say the new node is Z. Okay. Now, this Z will look something like this. It will have an address of its own. Let's say it is 500. Okay. Now, a new node will contain nothing as a previous or next. Okay. Okay. Now, for just to explain, I'll put this as previous and this as next. So this is how I'm going to denote this box as previous and this box as next. Okay. So when we create a new node, this is how it will look like. The previous node will also contain null and the next box will also contain null. This is how a new node will look like. Okay, this is a new node which we created. Now, what will be the next step? Now we are inserting it in the beginning, right? We are inserting it in the beginning. So we know that this should be pointing to A, right? If this is the first node, this should be pointing to the first node. Yes or no? Right, correct. So what we will do instead of, and our very first point, where is the address? Where is the address of A node stored in the head, right? In the previous video, we studied that the reference of the first node is stored in head. So head is containing the address of the first node, 100, right? So what we will do, this node should be pointing to, this node should be pointing to the first node, right? So this will be our next step. Okay, what will be our next step? The new node next box should be pointing to the head, right? The new node next point should be pointing to head. Okay, now what will be our second step? Our second step should be, now the since this A node now have a previous, it's a second node now, right? Since it has a previous, so what it should do? This A node, let's say A dot previous, now should be pointing to the address of this node. Yes or no? Since it has become now second node. Now it should not be null because it has a previous node, right? So now this should be pointing to this node. Now what is the address? Now we can say the new node, right? So this is how we are going to insert a node in the beginning of a linked list. Okay. So now let's learn about how to insert a new node at the end of a linked list. Again, the first step will be always to create a node. Our first step will be always to create a node. Okay, now again, let's create a node here. Our new node will always, let's name it Y. New node will always have previous and next as null. Now let's give it an address. Let's say the address is 600. Okay, now this is a new node which we created. Now, what should be our next step? Since now we want to add a new node at the end of a linked list, this, why was it storing null? Because we did not had any more nodes, right? We did not had any more nodes, but now we want to add a node. So instead of pointing to null, this C node should be pointing to the reference of this Y node. Yes or no? So what will be the next step? This C next box, this C dot next should contain the reference of this new node. Yes or no? Right? And now this Y node, this new Y node, what it should do? Its previous should be pointing to the C node, right? Its previous should be pointing to the reference of C node, right? So now what we will do, we can write like this: Y dot previous is equals to reference of C, right? So now this is how we are going to add a new node at the end of a linked list. Okay. Now we are going to learn about how to add a node in between of two nodes. Let's say we want to add a node here. Okay. Again, what will be the first step? As always, create a node. Okay. Our first step will be always to create a node. Now let's say we are creating a node X here. Okay. This will be null. This will be null. Okay. What will be the reference of it? Let's say the reference is 700. Okay. Now we want to insert a node here in between node B and C. What should we do now? We know since B is pointing to C right now, but we know B should be pointing to this X node. Yes or no? B should be pointing to X node. That means instead of null, it should store 102. So here B dot next should be pointing to X node, right? And And this, it should, instead of 102, we will store here 700 now, right? So this B should be pointing to X node now, correct? This is what we are going to do here. B next is pointing to X node now, okay? And my mistake here, now this X node, this X node previous should be pointing to reference of B, right? And what is the reference of B? 101. So here X dot previous should be pointing to the reference of B, right? So what did we do? We created a node. Okay, now B was pointing to C initially, but instead of pointing to C, B should be pointing to X. So B dot next we stored 700. And what is 700? 700 is the reference of new node X. Okay, now this X node next should be pointing to C now, right? So what we will do? X dot previous should be storing the reference of C. Now instead of null, we will store here 102. Okay, so it should store the reference of C now, which is 102. Okay, now this is done. X node previous is pointing to node B, X node next is pointing to C. Now here also you can see the C previous is pointing to B, but now it should be pointing to X, correct? Now that is why we will change this also. We will change this also. C dot previous should be pointing to X, which is 700. Okay, now here we will store 700. So now this is how. So basically what we did is we broke the chain, right? This B and C were pointing to each other, right? So instead of that, what we did is now B is pointing to X, X is pointing to C. Okay, B is pointing to X and X is pointing to C. And we changed the previous and next for all of the three nodes. Okay, that is what we did. So this is how we are going to insert a node in the beginning, in the end, and at any position. Okay. So in the next video, we are going to cover other operations in double linked list. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.